Growing up, these faces were everywhere. In your grandparents' living room, on primetime TV. They were the good guys, the heroes, America's sweethearts, the ones who could do no wrong. We would sing along to the songs and quote their movies, wanting to be like them. Never knowing the feeling wasn't the same. They didn't love us, they didn't like us, and hell, they couldn't stand us. See, while we were busy being entertained, these same people were actively working against us, calling us names behind closed doors, blocking our people from opportunities. Some of them straight up celebrated when our leaders were murdered. If that wasn't sad enough, none of this was a secret. They said this stuff out loud, in magazines, in interviews, on record. But somehow, these comments or views about black people never made it back to us. Hollywood did an excellent job keeping these negative views under wraps, making sure their stars always had a squeaky clean image. But today, we are pulling the curtains back and shining a spotlight on the racist views of these celebrities and setting the record straight. Today, we're exposing the truth they never wanted you to know. And trust me, some of these names will shock you. Walt Disney. Everyone knows the song Zip-a-dee-doo-dah. I'm sure you have sung it a few times in your days, not knowing the racist history behind it. Walt Disney's early films were filled with racist caricatures that would make your skin crawl today. Song of the South romanticized slavery with happy slaves. Dumbo featured crows that were walking minstrel show stereotypes. They even named the lead crow Jim Crow. But Disney's racism went beyond his films. He was accused of antisemitism, reportedly making disparaging comments about Jewish people in Hollywood. When the NAACP protested Song of the South in 1946, Disney dismissed their concerns entirely, saying they didn't understand his artistic vision. His studio was notoriously white for decades. It wasn't until after his death in 1966 that Disney began hiring black artists in meaningful numbers. Even worse, former employees reported that Disney would make casual racist remarks during meetings, treating discrimination like a business decision. The Disney company still wrestles with this legacy today, keeping Song of the South locked in their vault and adding content warnings to problematic films. But they've made billions off that innocent image while burying the ugly truth. Walter Brennan. Three-time Oscar winner. Walter Brennan wasn't just playing cranky old men on screen. He was one in real life with views that were genuinely disturbing. Brennan was an open racist and far-right extremist who allegedly celebrated Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, reportedly saying "good riddance" when he heard the news. He would go on racist rants between takes, making the lives of minority cast and crew members miserable. What made it worse was how he used his patriotic American grandfather image as cover. Brennan recorded albums of right-wing political speeches, spreading conspiracy theories about civil rights leaders being communist agents. He genuinely believed black people seeking equality were destroying America. His co-stars rarely spoke up because Brennan had serious power in Hollywood. Directors loved working with him and studios protected him. Even today, film historians tend to gloss over just how toxic this beloved character actor really was, focusing on his acting talent instead of his hateful beliefs. Jerry Lewis, the king of comedy, had a very ugly side to his humor. Jerry Lewis regularly used racial slurs in his stand-up routines and did exaggerated racial impressions that went far beyond what was acceptable, even for the time. In one notorious routine from the 1950s, Lewis performed an extended bit-mocking black speech patterns and mannerisms that was so offensive, even some white audience members walked out. But he kept doing it because it got laughs from certain crowds. When challenged about this material, even into the 2000s, Lewis dismissed criticism by saying they were just jokes, and people were being too sensitive. In a 2006 interview, he actually said that comedy has no boundaries, and refused to apologize for any of his past material. What's particularly galling is how his charity work with muscular dystrophy gave him moral cover. People would say, He can't be that bad. Look at all the good he does. But doing charity doesn't erase the harm your words cause to entire communities. His status as a comedy legend consistently shielded him from serious criticism about his bigotry. James Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was America's everyman, the war hero with the A.W. Shucks charm who fought fascists in World War II. But when he came home, he fought against equality for his own countrymen. Stewart held conservative anti-civil rights positions and was linked to groups opposing racial integration during the 1950s and 60s. He quietly donated money to organizations fighting school desegregation and voting rights. For someone who fought fascism abroad, his resistance to equality at home was deeply hypocritical. In 1963, when Hollywood stars like Marlon Brando and Paul Newman joined the March on Washington, Stewart was notably absent. Instead, he was reportedly furious that the industry was getting involved in political causes, as if civil rights were just politics and not human decency. Because of his beloved public image and careful PR team, Stewart was never seriously challenged on these views during his career. Interviewers knew not to ask, and the press played along with the nice guy persona. The uncomfortable truth was buried beneath layers of carefully crafted wholesomeness. John Wayne. John Wayne never hid his racism. He was proud of it. In that infamous 1971 Playboy interview, he didn't just say he believed in white supremacy. He went further, saying black people weren't educated to a point of responsibility and wouldn't be for generations. But wait, it gets worse. Wayne also justified the genocide of Native Americans, saying, "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from the Indians." There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. What's wild is that Wayne said this in 1971, not 1871. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and this man was still out here defending genocide and white supremacy in a major magazine. Wayne also used his influence to blacklist actors and directors who supported civil rights. He had enough power in Hollywood to end careers, and he used it to punish anyone who stood up for equality. Today, there are ongoing protests to remove Wayne's name from Orange County Airport, and rightfully so. This isn't about erasing history, it's about not honoring someone who openly advocated for our oppression. Henry Ford. Henry Ford didn't just revolutionize manufacturing, he revolutionized hate. From 1920 to 1927, Ford published the Dearborn Independent, a weekly newspaper that he distributed to Ford dealerships across America. Every issue was packed with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and anti-black propaganda. Ford compiled these articles into a 4-volume book series called The International Jew, The World's Foremost Problem. This wasn't some underground publication. Ford distributed nearly 500,000 copies, spreading his poison across the country. Ford's writings directly inspired Adolf Hitler, who kept a portrait of Ford in his office and cited him in Mein Kampf, calling Ford his inspiration. When Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from Hitler in 1938, he accepted it proudly. But here's what really gets me. Ford specifically targeted black Americans too. His paper promoted the idea that jazz music was a Jewish plot to corrupt white Americans through Negro influences. He funded hate groups while positioning himself as defending American values. Ford only backed down when Jewish groups organized boycotts that hit his profits. Even then, his apology was half-hearted and didn't stop him from continuing to fund anti-Semitic causes privately. Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple's case is particularly heartbreaking because she was just a child. But Hollywood used America's sweetheart to normalize the most toxic racial messages imaginable. In The Littlest Rebel, little Shirley danced and sang with Bill Bojangles Robinson, but the movie portrayed slavery as a happy, harmonious time. Shirley's character had loving relationships with enslaved people who were depicted as grateful for their bondage. The film literally taught children that slavery wasn't that bad. In other films, Temple performed in blackface, doing exaggerated mammy routines that perpetuated every harmful stereotype about black women. These weren't brief moments, they were extended musical numbers designed to get laughs at our expense. What makes this even more insidious is that Temple's innocent, childlike delivery made these messages more palatable. When a sweet little girl is singing about happy slaves, it doesn't feel like propaganda, but that's exactly what it was. Temple herself was a victim of the brutal studio system, but as an adult, she never publicly reckoned with the harmful content she was forced to create. Her legacy remains largely untouched because people remember the cute little girl, not the racist propaganda she was used to spread. Bob Hope. Bob Hope was beloved by troops and audiences alike, but his comedy relied heavily on the worst kind of racial humor. During his USO shows, Hope would regularly perform for segregated audiences, white troops in front, black troops in the back, or separate shows entirely. Hope's jokes weren't just using stereotypes, they were actively promoting racial violence. He made light of lynching, calling it Southern justice in his routines. He mocked the physical features of Asian people during World War II, describing them in terms that were pure propaganda. In his road pictures with Bing Crosby, Hope consistently played characters who saw non-white people as objects of ridicule or conquest. These films were seen by millions worldwide, spreading American racism as entertainment. When the civil rights movement gained momentum, Hope didn't evolve. He doubled down. In the 1960s, he was still making jokes about uppity black people and suggesting that civil rights protesters were asking for too much too fast. Hope never apologized or showed any understanding of how his words contributed to real violence against communities of color. He's remembered as the guy who entertained the troops, but we never talk about how his humor came at the expense of people who were also serving their country. Judy Garland. Even Dorothy had a dark side to her rainbow. As a child performer at MGM, Judy Garland was forced to appear in blackface musical numbers that were some of the most degrading performances ever put on film. In Everybody Sing, from 1938, teenage Judy performed in full blackface, doing an exaggerated mammy routine complete with the accent, mannerisms, and stereotypes. But unlike Shirley Temple, Judy was old enough to understand what she was doing, and she did it with enthusiasm. What's particularly troubling is that Garland was herself a victim of MGM's brutal studio system. They drugged her, controlled her weight, and exploited her for profit. But when it came to perpetuating racism, she seemed to have no problem playing along. Later in her career, when she had more control, Garland never spoke out against the racist content she had performed. She never used her platform to apologize or acknowledge the harm these performances caused. Today, Garland is celebrated as an LGBTQ+ icon, and rightfully so. Her struggles with the studio system and her vulnerability on stage resonated with marginalized communities. But we can't ignore that she also participated in our dehumanization, even if she was initially forced into it. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas is often praised as a hero for helping end the Hollywood blacklist by crediting screenwriter Dalton Trumbo on Spartacus. But his record on race tells a very different story. Multiple reports from the 1950s and 60s describe Douglas making racist remarks on movie sets and actively working to prevent black actors from getting meaningful roles. When Sidney Poitier was being considered for major parts, Douglas reportedly lobbied against him, claiming audiences weren't ready for black leading men. Former co-stars and crew members reported that Douglas would use racial slurs casually during filming, creating hostile work environments for the few black people who managed to get jobs in Hollywood. His production company, Bryna Productions, had an unofficial policy against hiring black performers in prominent roles. What makes Douglas's case particularly complex is that he genuinely did brave things in fighting McCarthyism. He risked his career to stand up for blacklisted writers. But when it came to standing up for black actors and crew members, he was part of the problem. Some believe his later charitable donations and foundation work were attempts to rehabilitate his image, after years of discriminatory behavior became more widely known. But doing good later in life doesn't erase decades of actively working against black progress in Hollywood. Still, there's something to be said for attempting to make amends, even if it came too late. Here's what really gets me about all of this. It wasn't hidden. These people said this stuff openly, proudly on the record, but somehow it never made it back to our community. Why? Because Hollywood's PR machine was working overtime to protect their investments. They knew that if black audiences knew the truth about their biggest stars, those box office numbers would take a hit. So they buried the quotes, sanitized the interviews, and sold us a fantasy. They made billions off our loyalty while these same stars were actively working to keep us oppressed. The real tragedy isn't just what these celebrities said and did, it's how many opportunities were stolen from black performers who never got their chance because these people blocked the door. So what are we going to do with this information? Are we going to keep pretending these people were heroes, or are we finally going to see them for who they really were? Drop a comment and let me know which one of these shocked you the most. And if this video opened your eyes to something you never knew, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Black History Uncovered, because there's a lot more truth they don't want us to know. Until next time, keep questioning everything they taught us, and I'll see you in the next one.